In this video, we're going to set up our scene in Solaris and we're going to render our result in Karma. So let's go over to Solaris and set that up. So I just want to make a big disclaimer, being that I'm not going to talk about or develop a full USD workflow and write out assets and stuff. I'm just going to show you the easiest, quickest way to load in this geometry and render it in Solaris just for the speed of it. So I'm going to switch over to Solaris. And you'll see we've entered the USD stage here. I'm just going to tap D and change the background color to the new funky dark gray. It's because I think it looks pretty cool. And let's just pop this up and tap P. So as always, when we go into the stage, we need to import our geometry from Houdini into the USD stage. And probably the easiest node to do that with actually is the scene import all. So the scene import all will import everything. If I go to the object level, basically it'll import anything here with the visibility flag turned on. So you'll see we've brought in the fountain, the bubbles and the water. So if I just go back to the stage and open this up, you see we've got our bubbles, fountain and water brought in. And it's going to put that all here in the basically where this destination path is. So I want to put all these under a folder called geometry. So up here I'm going to type geometry. There you go. So now they're under a folder called geometry, and there's our bits and pieces in there. That's not really essential, but it just keeps it nice and tidy. Now the thing is, let's have a little closer look. We've brought that in. We can turn off the visibility of stuff like this, so we can turn the water off, we can turn the fountain off, and you'll notice if I run forwards, there's our bubbles. Got the bubbles in there as well. So the next thing I want to do is put a ground plane in here. So for that, let's just make a grid, so we can make geometry in here. We'll call this guy. If you notice here, that's put that just there, and it's called it the operator name here. So let's actually call this ground. So this $OS means the operator string, so that's the name of the node here. See, if I've changed it here, the path is now /ground, and you'll see it's /ground. We actually want that to go into geometry. So if I just copy this name here with Control-C, I can paste that there. Oh, let's put the little slash in as well, /, and now that's also in geometry ground. And if I merge these guys together, you'll see everything is under this folder called geometry now, including our new ground element. So that just keeps things nice and easy and tidy. The other thing is, you'll notice the scene import all does in fact import all your materials as well. Yeah, let's just turn that off for now. We don't want any materials brought in. Here, the star means all objects. You can actually click on here and specify what you want to bring in. So that we could just bring in the bubbles, for example, and that just comes in. Or we could say we want the bubbles, water and fountain, and then it just brings those elements in. So you can be very specific here about what to bring in. So even though it says all, it's up to you. You can customize that a little bit just to bring in what you want to bring in. So that's good. We've got our grid and our ground and our geometry there. I actually want this ground to be a bit bigger, so I'm going to select that, and then the uniform scale here, type 100, so that's nice and large. So I'm going to find a nice angle of view, something like this looks interesting. And then I'm just going to do Control-click on the camera, just drop a camera in. What I'm actually going to do is just disconnect that for a moment. Let's just make a couple more merge nodes. I like to do it this way, but you don't have to. So I can merge the cameras in, and then I can merge the lights in a bit later on. In fact, let's create a dome light for our HDR map, which we can pop in there. So you can download any HDR that you want to. I'm actually going to download one from Polyhaven. So let me just drag my browser over. So Polyhaven's a great free resource for HDRI images. So let's go and pick one. Let's try this one, Rural Asphalt Road. We select that. We only really want 2K. EXR, and I'm just going to download that and save that to disk. So let's load that in. So let me just pop this open, go and find where my HIP is saved. There we go. I'm just loading the rural asphalt road HDR map. There we go. So let's unlock the camera because I don't want to accidentally move it. We can see we've got that HDR map in there. That's all good. Let's just make sure we save. So we've got our lights. We want to add materials. Let's create a material library. In fact, I like to do that above the camera and lights. So let's just put that up here. And let's do assign material. So we can assign the materials we'll make. We'll make the materials in a moment. And then we want a Karma node, which will do this. We just need to make sure we've got the right camera primitive. We have, because it's called camera 1. So let's open up cameras, camera 1. That's the right primitive. It gives you a warning otherwise. And there we go, we're good to go. All we need to do now is apply the materials and test out the rendering and shading. So I'm just going to do a quick test render. We're on the CPU engine. So let's select CPU here now. I think that's new for 20 is the fact that you've got to choose the right engine here. If you choose the wrong one, by the way, it gives you an error. Look, it says there's a mismatch. So let's go back to CPU. There we go. And we can see I need to change the light direction. So let's maybe try 90 degrees, or maybe a bit more, 120. Yeah, no, I like 120. Seems pretty good. Yeah, let's make some materials to apply to this. So that's all good and set up and ready to go. So yeah, let's apply some materials to this. So in order to apply materials, I'm going to use Megascan's bridge, which is here. And I'm going to use these two, the rough asphalt and the worn concrete. But we need to make sure it's installed in Houdini. Now, if you already have Bridge installed, that's great. If you don't, it's free to download from the Quixel Megascans website. And you can also, if you have an Epic account, you can log in and use the stuff. I believe you can non-commercially. If you use it commercially, you should pay for a license. But otherwise, I think you can use this for your development stuff. So that's what I'm going to do. Now, it's not, if you do install this, you'll notice it doesn't actually work for Houdini 20 because they haven't created the plugin for it yet. But actually, that's a very easy thing to fix. They haven't updated the plugin for a while. And all you need to do is install it for a version of Houdini that it does work. I think either 19 does, or 18.5, something like that. So what you want to do is go to where your Houdini's already installed, and you'll find, and it's working in with Megascans, you'll find this packages folder. Inside that, you'll notice there's where is it? A Megascans JSON here. So you just need to go to your Houdini's 20 folder, make a packages directory here, and copy that JSON in there. That JSON basically just relates to where this live link plugin is installed with the that came with Megascans, and that works with all the versions. So you just need to hack that in there, which is quite straightforward, and restart Houdini. When you restart Houdini, you'll see this Megascans drop down at the top, and you can open up the plugin. So you need to have this open for it to talk to the bridge, basically. So I'm not interested in the shaders so much here. I'm more interested in just the maps that it uses. So let's do that. Let's just first of all click on this little plus there. That's exporting to Houdini. And I'll click on the little plus here and export this one to Houdini too. Now that we've done that, you'll see that it's brought both of those shaders in here in the matte context. We don't want them here. We actually want them in Solaris. So I'm just going to do Control C. We're going to go back to the stage, and then inside the material library, we're just simply going to paste them here. Let's just turn this off for a minute. So I'm not going to use these principled shaders. I'm actually going to use materialX shaders to make all the materials for this project. So we'll look at how we can build those materialX shaders right now. So yeah. Now, what's nice about Houdini 20 now, they've simplified the shading workflow somewhat. If you hit tab and type, the first thing you'll notice is the menus are all nicely organized. And what we want to do is we want a Karma material builder. So you'll notice you only really need to use these two. Karma material builder will create a materialX shader that will work both for the CPU and XPU engine. So you don't need to change anything between them, and it's much more set up more correctly these days. Also in Pyro, we now have all the Pyro shaders have been put together, so we don't need to use the XPU one separately to the normal one. All of these support both engines, which is very good. So I'm going to use this Karma material builder here. So this is going to take the place of my asphalt. So I'm just going to Control C the asphalt, and then here I'm going to call this Karma rough asphalt, so I know the difference. Let's just move these over here. I'm actually going to turn off these brown flags. The reason you turn those off, if I just come out here for a moment and select the bottom of the network here, you'll see in the materials here, my shader appears. So basically anything that's got the brown eye will appear down here. See the other two appearing? I don't want those to appear. I'm going to delete them anyway, but just I'll turn the eye off so they don't appear there for now. What I'm interested in is these paths to the texture maps. These are the bits that I really want. And what I'm going to do is I want to copy and paste them inside this network. So to do that easily, I'm just going to split this pane. I'm going to click on this little drop down, and I'm going to do split pane vertically. Where are we? Split pane top and bottom. No, wrong way. Let's not do that. Let's close pane. Let's split this pane left and right. That's what I wanted to do. So let's just shrink this down a little bit. And then this one, tap P, so we see this parameter pane here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, oh, shouldn't have done that. I wanted to lock it. So there we go. Let's select this principled shader and let's lock this. So now you'll see I'll be able to select these other nodes and this one won't change. So there's the paths that I want to copy. So on this left-hand side, I'm going to now go inside the asphalt, or rather the Karma material. And you'll see, different to other versions of Houdini, new to this version, we've got the materialX standard shader, which you'll recognize, all plugged in here. We've got the output collecting everything together. We've got our displacement, so we can do the displacements. And we've got this material properties node here, where we can create render properties particular to this material. And these will override the ones in the Karma node. So we can tell certain materials to have more refraction or reflection quality, for example, or to increase the diffuse limits or whatever we want to do on this particular material. So that's really, really handy. And that will enable you to fine-tune your scene per material, which can heavily optimize things. But the first thing we want to do is start to bring these texture maps into our rough asphalt here. So there's a couple of nodes we can use for this. If we hit tab and we type in image, you'll see we've got a materialX image node. Where is it? Is it? There we go. So we've got this materialX image, but we've also got tiled image. So tiled image will give us extra parameters that we can tile the texture map. So that's the one I'm going to use, actually, tiled image, because I think that's the most useful. So let's just drop the tiled image one in here. So I'm going to call this, what have we got first of all, base color. So we'll call this, we'll just call this base. We also want roughness, so we'll create another one called rough. These are two maps. What else do we need? We need reflectivity. So let's grab another one, call this, we don't have reflectivity here, but we do have spec. Essentially, if we look at the specularity, that would be this one here. The specular value is essentially the reflectivity. What else have we got here? So we've also got the bump map. So let's rename this to normal. because actually this is a normal map. If you look, you've noticed it says bump. We're using a normal map, and this is displacement. So let's copy one more and call this a displacement. There we go. So let's talk about wiring these in. Well, first of all, let's put our map values in. So let's go to texture. Let's just do Control C, Control V on that one. Now, the other interesting thing is we can control the color space now. Even though this is a RAT, it's a linear file, but it's a linear file that's been encoded in sRGB. So really, we want to say this is a linear sRGB texture. So that's the right kind of encoding for that. In fact, let's set the roughness. That only really matters for a color image. For black and white images, that doesn't really matter at all. And certainly you don't want any color management for your normal map or your displacements. So really only for the color images are you interested in, you're concerned about the correct color space. Now you'll notice the tiling here, we've got this UV tiling, this parameter. So this is where we can multiply up the tiling up 2 by 2, 4 by 4, etc. So what I want to do is be able to control that at the same time for all the nodes. So I'm going to create a couple of extra nodes for that. First thing I'm going to do is type materialX constant. So we want to create a constant number here. So this is one number for our tiling. So we'll call this 1. And let's call this tiling. So if we put 2 in, we can have 2 by 2, etc. And I want my tiling to stay square. So this is why I'm just using the one number. We can then use a materialX combine. So here we just want to make a vector of 2 rather than a vector of 3. So I'll have a combine 2. And this is the same as Houdini's float to vector, essentially. So even though it's a combine 2, we don't want a color, we want a vector 2. There we go. And you'll see the colors now match the data type, just like with normal vex. So here we can plug in the same number into both slots. And now we can plug that into our our tiling. There we go. So plug that into the tiling there. So plug this one into the tiling, plug that into the tiling, plug this into the tiling, and that one. And last but not least, oh, that was displacement. There we go. So now I can control the tiling from one place, which is pretty handy. So let's plug these maps in. So the base color, let's click on base. This wants to be on base color itself. The roughness wants to go into specular and choose specular roughness. The specular, actually, you'll notice the data type here is a bit wrong. That's because this is bringing in a RGB image, even though it's a black and white texture map. Oh, look, let's paste that in as well. Control C, Control V. Forgot to paste the maps in. In fact, let's just do that now. Here, I'm going to copy the reflectivity, put that in the specular. Let's copy the normal, put that in the normal. Let's copy displacement. Where are we? There we are. Control C. Let's go to displacement, Control V. There we go. So we've got all our maps plotted in. So as I was saying, the roughness here is bringing, think it's bringing in a color image here. Actually, we could set that to float, although that's a bit dodgy. Let's leave it on a color image. What I'd rather do is actually take the luminance, which is pretty much what we want to do. Or we could just take any one of these channels out of there. So here I'm just going to take the luminance. So if we type luminance, we can take the materialX luminance. And then this is going to guarantee the same value in red, green, and blue channel. And then here we saw the vector to float. Sorry, the float to vector, which is the equivalent here, the materialX combine. So the vector to float equivalent would be a materialX separate node. So here we want to separate color 3 or vector 3. It doesn't really matter actually. Let's do color 3. And then we can plug that value in, and then we can take either the RG or B. So let's plug that into specular roughness. There we go. So we know that we're handling that correctly. We're taking the luminance value of that map, and then we're just taking either the red, green, or blue channel because it'll be the same once it's the luminance. Now we need to do the same for the specular. So I'm just going to grab these two nodes. Let's plug the specular in there. and then we'll plug this into specular, and then just literally the specular color. This would be the reflectivity. Let's just put it in the specular directly. So let's go to, where are we on this one? So here you want that to be connected to this specular slider, so it's saying how bright or non-specular it is. So now we need to plug in our normal map. We've got the normal map plugged in here. So for that, if you type normal, you'll see there's a materialX normal map. So this will make sure that the data is being converted into the normal map correctly. So we'll plug that into the in. And here you'll notice that we can change the space from tangent space to object space as normal. And we've got a little scale parameter on that. So whenever you bring in a normal map, you've got to make sure you use the materialX normal map so it gets read in correctly. And if you look on here, under geometry, we've got the normal there. So we can just plug that straight into where it says normal. And then last but not least, we have our displacement. So again, I'm going to grab the luminance trick that we did before. Let's plug that in. And then let's plug in one of these parameters to our displacement here. And again, we've got control over the scale. So if you look on the original rough asphalt, let's not jump around, you'll see that the it had this element scale that was quite small. So let's bring that 0.015 to be similar. And we'll also notice there's an offset here. So that's suggesting that the normal map, the displacement map we're bringing in is going between the ranges of 0 and 1. And then when we apply this offset, it's now going to go between the values of minus 0.5 and plus 0.5. So we end up pushing in the surface and out as opposed to just displacing outwards. So we can emulate that in here with a remap. So if we add, type in remap, we can bring in a materialX remap. And we want to plug that here before the displacement. Let's just pop the remap in. So our old numbers were between 0 and 1, and our new numbers should be minus 0.5 and plus 0.5. We've got to obviously see how this looks in a render to see if that works. And then we can obviously scale it here. Let's make this a bit larger so we can see the effect. So I've kind of set this up now pretty much the same as the principled shader. So let's test that for a minute. I'm just going to click on this little triangle to flatten that window down. Let's just save. So let's apply this material and then we can test it on the ground. So let me relock the camera and just choose a slightly different angle on this. Let's come in a bit closer. Let's unlock the camera. So to apply the material, we can go to assign material, and it's a question of dragging your primitives here that you want to shade. In this case, I want to shade the ground with this. So let's pop the ground in there. And then there's the material. I can just drag that in this slot and instantly you'll see it picks up some color there. Now, funny enough, look, my little thing's disappeared here. If that ever happens, I just simply click on the plus, new pane tab type, viewers, and make a new scene view. And there you go. That now appears back there again. Hurrah. Excellent. Let's save and let's preview this in the CPU renderer. Turn off the little window display. And look, there's my texture map all zoomed out there. So I'm just going to hide the bubbles, foam and water for the minute just so I can see the ground. So I need to scale this texture. This is why I put the tiling in. So here's my tiling. Let's change that tiling number. Let's maybe put in 50 because remember I made this quite large. That looks kind of interesting for the detail. Let's put 10 in so we can see what the displacement's doing. The displacement looks okay. Yeah, let's put in 50. So that's a nice small scale. Let's turn on the fountain again, see how the asphalt looks relative to the fountain. That looks interesting actually. I think that'll probably do for this example. So let's do the same again for the other material. Let's get rid of that asphalt now. So I'm just going to basically just copy this straight over. and rename this to Karma warm concrete floor. So let me just click on this little triangle over on the side here just to open up this pane again. So you'll see we've got the concrete floor selected. Let me dive inside this new one here. So there's my base color. So this is the concrete floor. Let me just double Control C this, Control V that in. So there's the roughness, Control C, Control V that in. Select the specular, which is the reflectivity, Control C, Control V that in. Let's select this normal down here. Let's go to the bump, Control C, Control V. And last but not least, the displacement. And look, that's a different depth actually, it's less. So maybe we need to adjust that in a minute. So here, let's paste that in with displacement. There we go. So there we go. The concrete floor is now done. So once you've built one, it's very easy to then copy and paste to the rest of them. So let's go to our assign material. Let's click on this little plus up here to make another slot. Now we can drag our fountain in. Now we can find our concrete floor material. I know it's concrete floor, but I wanted the concrete on the fountain. Let's see how that looks. Let's get a little closer. So that's interesting. So is that working all right? Yeah, let's bring down that displacement a little bit. Where are we here? So yeah, we could increase it just for fun. Yeah, if we put the displacement to 1, see what's going on there. That's very crunchy. Ah, yeah, it's the tiling's too much. Let's readjust this tiling. Let's maybe put 3 or something, just so it's tiling a little bit. Yeah, that displacement's way too heavy. Let's put 0.005 like it suggested in the other material. So it's nice and subtle. Look through the camera. There you go, I think that's okay. I think I'll live with that. So now we've got those two shaded. So the next thing I want to do is create a material for the water. So again, let's hit tab and type Karma. Use the Karma material builder. So it's a lot more simpler these days. There we go. Let's call this Karma water. Let's dive inside. So the Karma water is fairly straightforward, really. What we want to do is open up specularity. Let's bring the roughness down to 0.01, so it's got a very tight specular. Index of refraction should be 1.33. This will calculate all the correct Fresnel for us and everything. So we'll get the right reflective properties of the water depending on the glancing angle. Let's go down to transmission and make sure it's transparent. That's probably the most important bit. Otherwise, it's kind of pointless. So let's have a look at that. Let's apply that to our water here. So down at the bottom here, let me turn the water back on. That's the water. There we go. So we've got this blue color. And actually, that might get inherited. Anyway, let's see what happens. So in the assigned material, again, let's click the little plus. We can go and find our water geometry here, our water primitive. And then we can find the water shader. Let's drag that on. Now the water shader kicks in. Let's get in a bit closer. So you'll see we've got this nice clear water shader going on there. A few things you'll notice is there's some darkening here. That's because we don't have enough ray depths. If we look at the render settings here, we have the thing called limits. This allows how far the ray is allowed to penetrate through a geometry. And we're allowing it 4 limits. That means it can go through 4 edges before it returns black. Now through one pane of glass, that's fine. Through 2 panes of glass, now a pane of glass has 2 sides actually. So to get through one pane of glass, you need a refraction limit of 2. So for 2 panes of glass, you need a refraction limit of 4. As you can imagine here, where there's a lot of overlapping water, 4 is not enough. We're going to need a lot more ray depth. So look, let's change this to 6, and then up here, where it was dark, you'll see it's a lot more clear. We're allowing the light to go all the way through. It's still dark in some areas, so maybe we're going to need something like 8. There you go. Our water's looking quite clear now. Now, the water's technically too clear. The water should be casting a shadow, or what we call caustics. The water doesn't really cast shadow. What water does, it focuses light in some areas and moves it away from other areas. And that's the pattern you see when you see like bright sunshine on water. You know, you see that lovely pattern on underneath the water. Those are called caustics. And we can generate that here in the CPU engine. We could go to geometry and shading, and we can turn on caustics. So you'll notice it looks a lot darker for the moment because some of that light is being attenuated and focused in some areas by the water here. And it actually makes the water look much more natural and realistic with the color. It does take a little bit longer to render and to resolve. Now it's still looking quite dark. Let me get a bit closer actually. We've got the clipping plane there, but let's not worry about that. Now actually, if you want to select a region here, you can click on this region tool here and then just left click and drag, and it will just render that region for you, which can speed you up. When you're finished with this region, just click up here, clear render region, and then click off this tool. Now you can see it's quite dark at the moment. If I click on this bottom icon, the snapshot strip, here I can take a snapshot of my image. Now this will annoyingly, as you resize this window, you'll notice that refreshes. To stop that, view through the camera. Now you're viewing through the camera, you'll notice I can change this and it won't start to refresh the render again. You can remove a snapshot by hitting delete. This snapshot's got nothing to do with your render. But you know, if you're opening this window, resizing this window, you don't want the render to refresh again. But what you can do is click on snapshot and double click the snapshot, which brings up this viewer. And in here you can zoom in and out quite happily and inspect your render a bit more closely. In here as well, there's another new feature for Houdini 20 in the render gallery, is you can turn this button on, the render stats. And this is pretty handy. It shows you statistics about your particular render, how long it took, which engine you use, CPU or XPU, the number of samples, how much memory it took, and look, various other statistics so you can compare your renders. Is that finished? Yeah, that's finished. So I'm actually going to delete this snapshot and then re-snapshot the finished one here. And you see that's quite dark. Now, again, another new feature of Houdini 20 is to help improve those caustics. So for that, we can use what's called guiding. And to do that, we go to this Advanced tab and turn on Enable Indirect Guiding. Let's increase the number of samples here a little bit. So what this will do, it will help focus. The problem with the caustics is you're getting all these rays coming and shooting in different directions, and it's not able to solve accurately where the light gets focused or not. So what the indirect guiding does, it hints to Houdini, or Karma rather, where the samples should be calculated for the refraction. Instantly you can see this looks a lot brighter and a lot lighter. Let me just compare that. Let me just bring up the viewer here. So instantly you can see we're allowing the light to come through a lot better. It's still coming through here, just not as bright. I mean, if you look at the shadow, you can still see there's some lightning in the shadow where the light's able to get through here, but it's even brighter here because it's being more focused or more guided. Let me just delete that image and re-snapshot it because the render's completed a bit more now. So again, that takes a bit longer to render, but you get a much better caustic effect with the CPU engine. Let's snapshot now, that's completed. but it is quite noisy. You need a lot of samples and this can be quite slow. So the caustics is quite nice. The other thing we'll notice, actually, we don't have any motion blur on our water. Let's fix that. So the water itself has a velocity attribute called V, and we can use that for the motion blur. So if we go to the rendering tab, camera effects, you'll see motion blur is turned on, but let's say use the velocity blur. If we turn this on, and I just quickly snapshot this new image, let's compare that. You'll see there isn't actually any motion blur. It still hasn't turned on, which is fine. What we can do is we need to tell the geometry, let me shut this down. We need to tell the geometry to calculate the motion blur. So for that, we can use a render geometry settings node. So let's bring in a render geometry settings node and let's just plug it in after here. So you need to tell it which primitives you want to affect. I want that to affect the water. So let me drag the water primitive up here. And then we can say set or create, use velocity blur. In fact, it's giving us an error because I need to open up the water and drag the actual surface geometry in there. Because this mesh that has the attribute, not this container. So here we need to make sure we do actually open up the water and drag the mesh in there. Now if I just deselect this so it's not highlighted in the render view, you'll now see, oh, let me look through the camera so it doesn't keep re-rendering. If I just snapshot this image, you'll now see that it's now blurred. There we go, we've got blur happening on the water there. Now we've got our motion blurred water, which is a good thing. Let's delete that. You'll notice the first few samples we don't see the caustics brightening up what's going on inside the image there. Now that's much brighter. So that's all good. Let's set this back to Houdini. Oh, the other thing I need to warn you of, actually, if we change this to the XPU engine, which is a lot faster, let's change this to XPU. This doesn't do the guiding. It does the caustics, but it doesn't do the guided caustics. You'll notice there's no option here for guiding. They haven't implemented that yet in the XPU engine. So even though it's faster, we're not going to get that this nice sort of light color of where the stuff's focused. It's going to look more darker like this. So if I take another snapshot, you'll see it's gone darker like the original one. So that's the trade-off we're might have to sacrifice stuff with. Cool. Yes, so let's just turn off this region. Let's select the region tool and do clear region. Now we can see a render of the whole thing. I'm going to leave it on the XPU engine for the moment because that is a lot faster. Let's just save. We can see what's going on here. Even though we've got some caustic, there's some lightning in the shadow, but we haven't got much. So let's talk about rendering these bubbles. So I'm going to turn off the water. Let's see if we see any bubbles for now. So we don't see the bubbles there at the moment because at the moment they're just points, and we could render them as points, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to instance spheres to them and we'll render those instead. So let me set this to Houdini OpenGL. So for that, I want to bring them in separately. I don't want to bring them in with the scene import all. So on the scene import all, I'm going to click on this little browser. I'm just going to turn off the bubbles. So now you'll see they've disappeared. Let's turn them back on the water. They disappeared from our view here. So has our water for some reason. We just check. Oh yeah, because we've applied the shader now, it's transparent. Oh, silly me. Anyway, so let's bring in our bubbles separately and then create some instances. So for that, I'm going to do a SOP import. So a SOP import will allow me to bring in some SOP geometry here. So for that, I'm just going to bring in the bubbles. So let's open this up. Let's go and find our bubbles object. There you go, bubbles out. And there we can see our points. Now, if I jump forwards, you'll see it's quite slow to load it in because I'm actually loading all the geometry in here. I don't really want to do that. I just want to load it as a reference. So you'll see that's a little bit quicker to scrub. Again, we want them to go not into root, but into geometry. So it's going in the same folder as everything else. So here we've got geometry SOP import. In fact, we don't want to call it SOP import. We want to call it SOP import bubbles. There we go. Or import bubbles or whatever. So we don't want them as geometry like this. What we want to do is copy spheres to them. So I'm going to make a sphere geometry that's going to become my instance here. All right, and this is going to inherit the p-scale attribute. And again, I want to give it a in the same path here. So slash geometry. There we go. Slash geometry sphere. Oh, let's put a / in there. Geometry sphere 1. Now to instance this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an instancer node. And all this will do, will create instances of the sphere on each one of these points. And this is very memory efficient and fairly quick instead of actually creating all the geometry. So it'll create it at render time. So the way I'm going to wire this together is I'm going to plug this into the first input. Let's plug that in to the second, and let's plug these two together like so. So it's branched down like this. That's so this instancer can see both of these primitives. So we've got our points on our first input and our line on the second input. So let's change some settings here first of all. So the target points is the points where I want to copy the instances to, and I've not got them internally. I could use an object merge and import them internally, but actually I'm going to use the first input's points. All right, so it's going to use the points of this first input, which is the points we've just brought in. And if we actually have a look at that, if we open this up, yep, that will be this point 0 here. So let's just drag that primitive in to this first input there. There we go. So if we drag these points primitive up into here, you'll see it's loaded those in and using those first input points. So the prototype here we want from our second input, we want to drag that path to the sphere 1 in there. So if we go up here, that'll be this / geometry. So if we do / geometry, and it was called sphere 1. In fact, I don't think we need to do the path. That would have copied the spheres in anyway. So that we can see the spheres on there, big and small. Let's just pop this down a little bit. So yeah, you don't need to put the path in there. If you just revert to default, it's just going to pick up the primitives that it finds in there. There we go. And you can see we've got all our little spheres on there. Cool, and that should render as our spheres. So let's turn the points off. So it's this instancer here that we're actually going to render. So again, let's call this geometry. Let's put that in the geometry path, and let's call this instance bubbles. And that will change its name here, instance of bubbles. Let's merge that into the equation. Let's turn on the bottom node. So now we have our instance of bubbles in there. Let's look through the camera. Now I want to guarantee, if you notice, we've got the SOP import bubbles, which is the points, and we've got the instancer bubbles as well. I want to make sure I don't accidentally render the import points. So what we can do is we can add a prune lop. So a prune lop will just remove stuff from the network here. So you can tell it what to remove here in the primitive pattern. So here I want to grab this SOP import bubbles and just drag that in. And you'll notice the little eye turns off automatically for us. So that means it's not going to render. It's being removed before we get to the render settings. So that's all good. Let's save and let's have a look at how this looks now. So give it a second to kick off. But let me select all these images in my view here and just delete them. Not interested. Oh, look, there we go. Now we can see our white spheres everywhere. So I've just taken a fresh snapshot. You can have a look and see. Oh, they're quite bubbly. So let's go fix the shader on those. Let's just stop this for a minute. So I'm going to go inside here and I'm going to use the bubbles, sorry, the water as a foundation for the bubbles here. So let's call this bubbles. So they're transparent. Let's go inside. So there's one thing I want to change on here, first of all, is I don't want any sense of refraction like we were getting with the water. So I'm going to go to the geometry here and tell it it's thin-walled. So this is like it's, you know, thin-walled basically. It's like it's just a shell. So there won't be any refractions going through it. Because the bubbles, you won't see any refractions. Plus it will slow down the rendering. So let's see how that looks. We also need to turn on motion blur for them. And there we go. In fact, I need to assign that material, don't I? That's why there's no change. So let's go to the assign material, pick the little plus. Let's go find our instance of bubbles. There we go. Instance of bubbles. Just drag that in, and then let's find our bubbles material. Bubbles material, let's drag that on. And then let's see when it kicks off what happens to our white bubbles here. Oh, they go completely transparent. In fact, they've gone black. The reason they've gone dark and black is again because of the ray depths or ray bounces that we're concerned about. So this time, rather than putting up the ray depths here on the limits there, I'm going to do it on the shader only because I don't want to up it for the water. The water was working quite nicely. So in here in bubbles, I'm going to go to the material properties here, and we can go to limits, and where it says refraction, we can say add property. Let's put something like 24 in. And then hopefully that will lighten stuff up. So on the index of refraction here, I'm going to put the roughness up a bit higher. Let's put this to something like 0.4. Because what that'll do, it'll make it look a bit more white again. There we go. Because we're blurring the specular on each bubble to make it much more rough, to suggest that turbulenceness in the water. And it should give us a bit more of some white sense of that shading going on. Look, we can see it's gone a bit more white there. Let me just get that a bit bigger. Look, there's too white and there's a bit less white. So we want a suggestion, a subtle hint of this kind of white noisiness of those few bubbles being created. Let me make another snapshot of that. It's looking more interesting for sure. Right, let's add some motion blur to those bubbles. So again, I'm just going to drag my render geometry settings here, and let's drag the primitive for instant bubbles, prototype, geometry. Yeah, let's drag that in. There, I can just drag the instancer in. There we go. Another thing I want to do actually is just give my water a hint of color. I'm going to go to Karma water here. In fact, let's just select the camera and just get a bit closer. So I like to add a bit of color attenuation to the water. So here, if we give it a color, say we give it a nice sort of green color here, because it's got a deep, deep green color, but we can increase the depth. So it's only going to go to this color, say after 0.1 meters. So see, only where it's the thickest are we seeing that sort of green color. Otherwise, it's quite clear elsewhere. And you'll notice that's really affected sort of the way the caustics are working as well. So put that to 0.5 or something. So that we're suggesting it's murky greenish water. And you could always add a bit of dispersion if you want. That will slow things down for the rendering. But these are all supported now in XPU, things like the color attenuation and the dispersion, whereas they weren't before. And these can give you some nice effects on the look of the water, you know, that sort of rainbowy color, but at the expense of render time. So to keep the render quick, I'm going to probably keep with the XPU render engine. Yeah, let's just, where's that attenuation, the absorption, the dispersion here? Let's have even higher value. Higher values mean a much more subtle effect, really. But I'm just going to turn that off for now, to be fair. Let's make this color a bit brighter, less saturated. Cool. So we've got this trade-off between using the CPU, like I say, with the guided caustics or not. Just for speed, I'm actually not going to elect to use that. But yeah, you'll see that's quite noisy. Let's try and improve the look of this. Let's just switch the camera. Let's get a bit closer in. Something like this. Let's jump forwards a few frames. So I'm going to fine tune some of the settings on the XPU renderer here. So I'm going to change the samples, path trace samples, to something like 512 for now. It's quite brute force-ish, this really. There's not a lot to change apart from the number of samples, obviously your ray depths. You can increase your light samples. In fact, that's generally a good idea. And you can do that per light instead of here. This multiplies what's set on the lights, but it's better to do it per light. So if you select the light here, we can adjust the sample quality here and just put that to 2. Just gives you a slightly sharper looking image if you want to. Gives you more, more samples for the light, so it can help with sort of sharp speculars and stuff. So that's looking kind of foamy, which is what I wanted, that kind of look there. So all that's left to do now really is to render the sequence. So if I select this node here, this bottom node rather, up here we can set a specific frame range, and this will render it for us. So let's leave that going. That's going to take a couple of minutes. So what I might do is just pause the video until that completes, and then we can see how this looks with these settings. So the render has completed. Let me take a snapshot. Let's compare that. So if we bring up the render stats, we can see it took 3 minutes 36, even though we were closer in. And it's still a bit noisy, although it's starting to look fairly smooth. You can see we can see through the water, but just not as clear as the CPU with the caustics turned on. Then that's going to take 20-30 minutes a frame, whereas this takes 3 minutes a frame. Might render one of those to show. That's water's looking quite all right, actually. Quite interested to see how this moves. I think the samples could be still a bit dotty, so let's try and increase this to 1024. Let's see how we go with that. You don't want to turn on the denoiser. These are great for single frames, but they're not great for animations, because you will see noise in the you'll see noise in the denoising frame by frame. It's not temporally consistent. So let's just stow that for a minute and allow this render to go on. That's probably going to take about 6 minutes a frame, which is still fairly acceptable. So yeah, let me just again pause the video. Thank you for your patience, although it's instant for you guys. while this completes, and then I'll come back once it's done and we'll compare the two and then make a call about which settings I want to render this with. So that render is now completed. Let me take a snapshot and let's compare those. So if we look, it's a lot smoother. But all that high frequency noise is smoothened out a bit. So that'll probably do for us. That's taken about 7 minutes a frame. Cool. So before I do that, let's just compare that to the CPU one. I'm just going to save. Let me just make a copy of this render settings node and plug this one in instead. Let's change this to OpenGL. Let's switch this to CPU. Let's put this onto CPU. So the CPU engine, this will be a lot slower. So let's just optimize the samples here. So yeah, what we're going to do. So to optimize the samples, what I want to do first of all is yeah, to suppress all this noise, we're probably going to need quite high pixel samples here. Let's see where we go with the defaults for now. So already this is going to take 7 minutes. Although for the sake of speed, I'll probably use the CPU renderer. Just for sake of argument, let's have a look at how long this will take. So I'll just pause the recording once more while that occurs. So that render has now completed. If I just take a snapshot of that and compare it, you'll see that took 4 minutes, but it's a lot more noisy. So we'll see if we can optimize that for a minute and see if I can get it around the 6-7 minute mark. Because anything longer is probably going to take a little long. So one thing we'll notice though is the bright highlight here on the water. You'll notice it's broken up in the CPU. That we can only really fix with the primary samples here. But the rest of this noise is coming from the indirect rays. We can test that actually on the next pass by turning on some AOVs. We'll go to the image output. Let's turn on the diffuse direct and indirect. Let's turn on the reflection indirect and direct, or the direct glossy, indirect glossy. Lights and emissions are fine. Another couple of passes we want to turn on actually is albedo. And the extra render vars, the ray level outputs, we also want to turn on the normal. The reason I want to turn on albedo and normal are because I can actually use the noise reduction filter in COPS, and that one does actually work over time. And this will only work with the CPU engine because you also need the motion vectors. Now, if you turn on the motion vectors here, it'll actually turn off your motion blur, which is not what I want, because I just want the motion vectors, not for motion blurring later, because generally that's what you do want to do, is turn off the motion blur in the image and apply it in post, which is why you want to turn that on. But I just want to use them for denoising over time. So I don't want to turn it on here. What I do want to do is click on the plus underneath and then turn on the motion vectors using this drop down here. So if you come to the bottom, we've got motion vectors here. So what this will do, this will create an AOV for motion vectors, but without turning the motion blur off. Whereas if you turn this one on, it creates the same AOV, but it turns motion blur off. And I want motion blur in the beauty for sure. So these AOVs will help me see where the noise lies in the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to allow the renderer to have more samples. So here on the secondary samples, let's change this to 16. We're going to double up on the reflection and diffuse. So they're going to get 32 samples likewise as well. The other thing I want to do actually is go to the advanced tab and then sampling here as well. So because we're on this variance mode, what that's doing, it's working out on the first pass where the noise is in the image and then deciding where to do the primary and the secondary samples based on that. And it's based on a noise threshold which is set here. Now my secondary pass is quite noisy and it might not sample enough, so I'm actually going to reduce this down, which will actually force it to do more indirect secondary samples, which should optimize or should help speed up the rendering a bit. So what I'm going to do now is just save again, and this time instead of clicking on the viewport here, let's set this to OpenCL. Here directly in the render, or rather here in the viewport, you can click on this background. If I do that, it's now going to render this whole frame as a background process, and look here, there you go, look, it appears now in the render view here. And if I click on this one, we'll see the update here. Look, the render's occurring directly in the render view, and look, we can check out the stats as it's doing it as well. See, it's telling me what it's doing up here. So now we can leave that to finish. So that's estimating it's going to take about 15 minutes, but hopefully that's going to improve the quality over this noisy image here. And it all depends on what you want to do, if you want to sacrifice the speed for the image quality or not, but we'll make that call in a moment. So yet again, I'm going to just stop the video. We'll come back once this is completed. So that render has completed. We'll see we've removed the noise, but it's still quite dotty. It's not as smooth as this one, which is the XPU one, although this is taking 8 minutes now. But what I did want to show you actually is, let me just save this frame out. So we just save the frame out into here. Let's just call this test frame $f4.exr. There we go. Let's just save that out. What I can do is just show you how we could remove the noise, and let's see if that's acceptable. Actually, just showing you where the noise is. Let's go back here. We look at the AOVs I made. So if we look in the direct diffuse, we'll see this is pretty smooth. The direct glossy reflections. Okay, you can see there's noise breaking up here. Unfortunately, all we need to fix that, we'd have to increase this primary samples, which is going to slow it down. We could reduce this a little bit, which should also allow more primary samples to reduce that. So here's the indirect diffuse, again, still a little noisy. And the indirect glossy, again, pretty smooth actually, that one. So to improve that, we'd probably want to increase this, which would also scale these guys up. But that would also slow down our render. But let's see if the noise reduction can fix that for us. Now to test that, we want to go to the composite view. So let's go to image. Let's choose image up here. Here we go. So this is COPS. Let's bring an image network manager in. Let's dive inside and let's use a file node to bring in that test image that we rendered. There we go. And we've got our AOVs here. So remember I said in the actual Karma node to not turn on the Intel or the NVIDIA noise, because that does unfortunately make it a bit noisy. It removes it off a single image, but not over sequential frames. Whereas if you type AI or denoise AI in COPS, this one does work over time. And the reason it works over time is because it uses the motion vector pass to do that. So here you'll see it's expecting N and albedo, which we've written out. If I change this to optic 7 denoiser, this one expects the motion vectors too. And we do have all those AOVs. Look, there's the motion vectors. And you'll notice I've still got motion blur here in my beauty pass. So look, already that's looking a lot smoother. So I disable that and put that back on. You can see how it's removed all that high frequency noise. We've lost a little bit of detail. It's softened out image a little bit, but that might be worth sacrificing for the speed element. So this was at 7 minutes a frame. We've got a slightly blurry image. The only way to improve that is to obviously have slightly longer render times. So that's kind of working quite nicely. Let's go back to Solaris for a moment. In the stage. Well, let me bring up my viewer here. So that was this image. Let's load out this one that took 4 minutes, and you'll see that's even noisier. So let's save this one out. So all this 4, so we know it's 4 minutes. Let's go back to the image context. So let's now make a copy of this. Let's bring in number 4. Then we can compare the two. And look, you can see how much fidelity we're losing down here. It's going to pretty much mush now. So that's too low res. And look, we're losing we're losing all the nice detail in our foam here. It's quite painterly looking. Whereas here we're preserving much more of that smaller feature detail. So we're probably risking it going with this one at 4 minutes a frame. If we just compare that to the original image, so we're just not losing too much, but here we're losing a lot of detail. It's going to mush completely. So yeah, the moral of the story is you do need quite a decent resolution. You don't want this to do too much, just to kick in the last bit, just to remove any of that high frequency noise that you might see. So we're probably pushing it with these settings here. And that's all to get this nice lightness in the caustics in the water there, which I'm not sure that I'm that bothered about, but that's an artistic call, obviously. So let me go back to the Solaris again, so we can bring up this little window. Bing. So it's a question of whether I like this darker water or this lighter water. This, that looks a bit smoother than that one. I might go for the 8-minute and see how we look with that. Yeah, because 7 minutes with the XPU here. It's still a little bit grainy in there, although it does look nice and soft up here, which is kind of good. So yeah, it's making that trade-off which one to render with. I'm going to render with this one, and in fact I might put this up to let's see what happens if we put this up to 24 samples, just to help with that initial specularity thing going on there. So one last render, I'll test this out. Let's click background, wait for this to kick off, and I'll just see if these settings look good. If they do, then we'll set off the render. Just double click that again to get that to appear big. Where is it? There it is. So there's my render kicking off. So this might take, even though this one said it'd take 15 minutes, it actually took 8 minutes in the end. So I'm not sure that one is going to take 20 or there you go, already it's reducing down. So yeah, in fact, let me stop this render. Let me right click and do stop render. And then in the advanced here sampling, let me just bring this down as well to 0.05, 0.05 as well. So it's going to allow more of these primary samples to kick in. Let's try that. So let's get rid of this one, delete. Let's hit background again. Wait for that to kick in. There we go. And again, I'll pause the video until this one is completed. So now that one's finished recording, and that took 12 minutes compared to our 8 minutes. And you see we've got, again, less sampling again. We're looking much better there. So that's taking 12 minutes a frame. Let me save this one to disk as well. Save frame. That's this one. Yeah, 24 samples, whatever. Save to disk. So let's go back to the pops. Let's load in Another one over here. Let's display this one. Loaded the new image, there's 24. Again, slightly better fidelity than before, so that's looking much better. We're not losing too much detail compared to that one. But that's the really bad one. Let's compare these two. So you can definitely see that the second one with the more samples is slightly sharper overall. A bit more detail in there, especially up here as well. So we're resolving more detail. It's still a bit swirly. I think we might get away with that. Is it worth it to get this lovely caustic patterns that we can see in the water here? Probably is actually. So yeah, I might render with that one. Where are we? Oh, how long was this taking? It's about 12 minutes a frame. So yeah, we'll live with that. I'm only going to render frame 50. So we've got this run up, because remember it takes a bit of time for the white water to get going. So I'm going to just render the 150 frames from frame 50 onwards. So let's just delete channel here and put in frame 50 to the end. Excellent. So I'm going to stop the video while I record that, while I render that, and then we'll check that out once that's done. The render has now completed. So let's have a look at that. So here it is in MPlay. And you can see it looks slightly different. I changed a couple of things. Let me just show you what I changed. First of all, I reduced the roughness on the bubbles here, which has made it darker. And I increased the primary samples here to 32, just to remove that bit of extra noise. Other nice things we can see is the nice caustics here being reflected off the water. And we can see through the water here with the nice sort of guided guided caustics, which is a new feature of Houdini 20. Sorry, I can't get my words out. So yeah, the new caustic feature of Houdini 20 means you can guide them and you get this much nicer effect from that, which is not in XPU yet, unfortunately, which is the reason I've chosen to use the CPU renderer for this. So the downside of increasing the primary samples was that the render times went up to between 10 and 14 minutes. So on my machine doing 150 frames, that was like nearly a couple of days. So to me, that was acceptable. Anything longer probably wasn't. Ideally, I should increase this a bit more, because when you're denoising, you don't want the denoiser to do too much because it can just soften the image. But you would need to find that happy medium between, obviously, length of render time and quality of image. So this would be my happy medium, to be fair. So let's have a look at how we can remove the noise of this using these AOVs. So let's pop over to COPS. So for that, we can click on here and click to image. And we want to make an image network. So if you hit tab, you can go to managers and create an image network. And you can give this a name if you want. So let's call this denoise. And I'm going to dive inside. So we want to load in those images. So let's hit tab and type file, so we can read a file off disk. And I'm just going to sort this out by date, load in. There we go. We load in my image here. And we can see that's quite noisy. Remember, I rendered from frame 50 onwards, so I don't have the first few frames, and I've got it up to frame 200. The first thing, well, actually, what I want to do is I'll offset that, but what we'll do is we'll offset that shortly. Let's find a frame that we've got some nice noise on there, something like this. We want to see some noise on the, there we go, see some white highlights here. So that's where the noise is the worst. So the node we're going to use is the denoise AI. So if you hit tab and type denoise AI, we can pop that in. And like the rest of Houdini, you can turn the blue visualize flag on, and instantly you can see it's softened the image, it's removed the noise. We're using the Intel denoiser here, and again, this won't be consistent frame by frame. You might get artifacts from it if you've got an animation. So let's use the the Optics 7 denoiser, and you'll see this is looking for these AOVs that we wrote out, the N, the albedo, and the motion vectors. We've got those here. There's the albedo, there's the N, and there's the motion vectors. Let's go back to color. And we can see it's softened the image, but it's tried to preserve some detail. So what happens if we don't use these AOVs? Well, let's hit tab and type delete, and let's remove them and see what the effect is. So here with the delete node, I'm going to select them. Let's select the normal, the motion vectors, and the albedo. And then let's have a quick look at the highlights here. So at the moment, we've removed those AOVs. And if we use them, you'll see we bring back a little bit of detail. So we turn them off and we bring them back. So this is without the AOVs, and this is with the AOVs. So it preserves a little bit of detail. We might notice a bit of a change in these other areas, or maybe not. But we'll notice some change where there's high noise. As you'll see, with using the AOVs, we get a little bit more detail than without. And if we press play, let's remove that. Actually, we don't want to remove our AOVs. And if you press play, you may notice some artifacts in these other areas if you're not using those AOVs to help remove the noise. So it's a good idea to have those in. So let's create a shift node. So what a shift node will do, it'll allow us to offset the frames. So I want this to start from frame 1, but we're starting from frame 50. So what I want to do here is remove or offset by 49 frames. So I can just type -49. So that means my first frame become frame 50. So if I'm on frame 1, -49, offsetting to 49, that'll offset to 50. So my frame 1 becomes my first frame. And that means we'll finish on frame 150. So if I go to 151, oh, we have a frame there. 152, we don't. So there we go. We've offset our animation. And we're good to go. And we can see the nice sort of caustics coming through the water here and concentrating in some areas. So what we want to do now is either write this out as an image sequence, or we could write this out directly as a yeah, let's write it out as an image sequence. Always a good idea. And then what we'll do is we'll use tops to turn it into a video for us. So here I'm going to use a, oh, I didn't hit tab. Let's turn this node back on. So let's hit tab and type ROP to create a ROP file output. We can just plug this in, and then we can write out this image sequence to disk. We want frames 1 to 150. So I'm just going to write this out to disk here. We'll call this denoise render, and then $f4.exr. So we know that's denoised, and we want to output our image sequence, which we've got here, same resolution. Everything's good to go. So I could just write this out, and then actually these days you could write that out. You could go to mplay. In fact, where are we? Where's mplay here? And then you could go to export ffmpeg, and this will allow you to output it as a video. So that's another new thing of Houdini 20, that ffmpeg comes with it, so you can just output quick times and stuff. So you can do that. So what we could do is load it, write this out to disk, load it up in mplay manually, and then save it as a ffmpeg, as a video. Or we could use tops again to automate this. I like using tops, so let's use tops. So I'm going to create a top network, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to read in the ROP. I'm going to calculate the ROP first, and then we're going to bring in this ROP, calculate this network, and write out this ROP first, and then we'll create a movie from it as well. So we'll automate that with tops. So let's dive inside the top network. So what I'm just going to do is set this total slots to equal CPU count less 1. So I'm going to use as many resources as I can on this machine. And yep, we want a ROP fetch like before. So we'll hit tab and type ROP fetch. This will allow us to bring in the ROP network. So what I like to do is just come out here and do Control-C on the node. So select your ROP node and do Control-C. And if you go in here, you can just paste the node there, and it does the path for you, which is kind of handy. If you want a relative path, you can just click on the browser, choose relative path, and hit accept, and it'll do the relative path for you, which is pretty handy. This doesn't need to be done sequentially. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use lots of resources on my machine. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to the frames here, and let's set the frame range. So we're going to do 1, 2, oh, actually, let's remove this, delete channel. we've only got 150. I could change it down here, but I'm just going to do it there. So we'll do frames 1 to 150, and I'm not going to do them in one batch. In fact, let's go to the ROP network here and make sure it's not set to one batch. No, it's not anything like that. That's good. So in here, we don't want it in one batch. So I've got 150 frames. So I'm going to do them in batches of 30. So that means I will get 5 batches of 30. Is that right? Yep, 5 batches of 30. So this will render 5 processors simultaneously. So if I put 10 batches, then I'll have 15. If I put 50, I'll have 3. So 30, I'll have about 5 processing. It depends on how many processors you've got on your machine, how many batches you can simultaneously do. Having smaller batches or bigger batches is not necessarily advantageous, because if you have smaller batches like one frame, it has to take time loading up each one. If you do them in 2 bigger batches, you might not use your resources efficiently. So it's finding that sweet spot. Plus you might not have enough RAM to process the network if you've got too many batches as well. So you have to kind of see for the network and do a couple of tests first. So we want all this to finish before we write our video out. So we'll type wait for all. So this will make sure all those jobs finished first before we pass the data to the next bit. And then we can type ffmpeg. We want to encode video. So here, this will just write that video to disk, which is pretty handy. So I'm going to rename this to dnoise vid, because it's going to use that $OS here in the file path name. And do we need to change anything here? No, we could live with these defaults, I think. They're pretty okay. Yeah, the frame list, ideally, this wants to be saved where your HIP file is, so it may fail. So let's just put $HIP here instead in the frame list, instead of that variable that was there. Just put $HIP here in the frame list, because if the frame list is not where the scene file is, it can give you an error and you may not have specified that variable. So let's save the scene, and then on this bottom node we can type right click and do hook node or shift G, and this will process the network. And look, there's my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 processes going off as it's writing out each one of those image sequences. So I'll have the image sequence on disk, and I'll also have a QuickTime movie made of that as well. So I'll just give that a second or two. I might pause the video. It's going quite quickly, as you can see. So again, you need to check how much RAM you're using if you do this. And it's quite nice. It tells you how many frames here are left to do. This is how many frames it's completed up here. And obviously these are still left to do one job, because remember, it's collecting all of these jobs together into one job, and it's sending that one job down to make a video of that one job. And this will take all those frames and turn that into a sequence for us. So I'll just pause the video while these last little few catch up. There we go, that's now completed. We'll see all the jobs have gone through. And if I bring up the video that it's made, here we go. We can see that that's now running through, and it's our QuickTime, and it's slightly softer than what we had, but I think that's acceptable for the render times that I was getting. So here we've got the nice sort of reflections from the caustics. We can see that in the water here. We've got our bubbles, and we've got a nice flow of liquid that hopefully doesn't feel jelly-like, which is what happens if you don't get this sort of high enough particle count going on there. And you couldn't tell that this was simulated in 2 separate parts. Again, because of the way we joined the 2 sims, it all looks like one continuous simulation. So there we go. I hope that was interesting for everybody, and I hope that you've got something out of it. I look forward to seeing any results that people have done using these techniques in order to make bigger fluid sims using smaller parts and joining them together, or even the techniques of bubbles and stuff like that, or even just the nice cool sticks of Houdini 20, things like this lovely detail that you're seeing here in the where the light's going through the water and down in the water itself, and there's lovely reflections off the water too. And yep, using the denoiser to speed up your rendering. So it would have taken a lot longer per frame, but I got away with the minimum time I thought, and I've got a nice smooth image at the end of it. So thank you, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you in some future videos.